Hello and welcome to episode 25 of Stitched in Sweden. I'm Maria, your host, and you can find me on Ravelry and Instagram as mmonska. The show notes for this episode and all the other episodes are on the blog, which is stitchedinsweden.blogspot.com. And you can also find some chatter over in our Ravelry group, which is called Stitched in Sweden. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about this week in Stockholm. A couple of projects that I've been working on, one finished object, and sort of a follow-up on a technique tip from last week. And I have two questions from viewers that I will answer in this week's episode. So starting out with this week in Stockholm, I have been doing a lot of knitting and a lot of pattern writing. This week I have finished writing up a pattern for my new shawl design, as well as sock pattern and my cowl pattern. So it takes a lot of time, and there's always a lot of going back and forth and checking things and formatting and making sure everything looks just the way I want it to. So I did that for most of the week, but on Friday we had some friends over for dinner, which was a lot of fun, and we have quite a small apartment, like I've said before, so if we have people over for dinner, usually we move the kitchen table into the living room here, which is where I'm sitting, and we did that. I was hoping that we were going to be able to go down to the water and maybe barbecue or something down there, but right around 4 o'clock or so, 5 o'clock, it started getting cloudy and rainy, so that wasn't an option for Friday, but we had a great time anyway. On Sunday, we were able to go down to the water and have dinner down there. Thomas and I brought some salad and just some kind of snacks and things we had lying around, and we bought a pizza on our way down, and we sat down on the grass down by the water for a couple of hours yesterday, and it was perfect because it wasn't too hot, but we had some nice sun and a lot of people relaxing and enjoying a sunny day. So that was a great way to end the weekend. I also stopped over at the Makery 14 this week, which is a yarn shop in Old Town. They have, Stephanie is the owner, and she has a couple of different types of yarn. It's kind of a combination yarn shop, stationery, sort of. She has very particularly curated things, I guess. She has some really nice stationery, some nice notebooks, pens. She has some project bags, as well as bags that are for like travel bags. They're small cotton bags, I believe, that you could put in your suitcase, and they have a different design on the front, so like for your shoes or for toiletries or something like that. Anyway, it's a really small little shop, but she does have some yarn there, so I stopped by there quickly last week to grab another ball of the Holst garn to finish my shawl design, which I'll show you in just a little bit. I actually did get a question, not directly a question, but on the Ravelry forum about yarn shops in Stockholm. And the two that I have been to are Makery 14, which is in Old Town, right in the city center, and the other one is Litet Nisten, which is over in Maria Torget, which is also fairly close to the central station. It's the fourth stop away on the red line from the train station, so it only takes a few minutes to get there from the center, and you can walk there as well. would be kind of a long walk, but you could do it. I've done it before. Yeah, so those are kind of the two main yarn shops in this area that I have been to. That was kind of a little tangent. Anyway, I also just wanted to start out by saying a big thank you to those of you who responded this week in the Ravelry group. I haven't really responded to many of those posts because I just was so busy this week writing patterns, and I was trying to not be on the computer otherwise. But I really appreciate your responses, and they're quite interesting to read. Last week I had mentioned sort of the idea about enjoying what you're knitting and taking your time with it and trying to select projects that you will enjoy for the whole time, which isn't always easy to know in the beginning, but if you really don't like doing a particular thing in knitting, like if you don't like knitting long sections of stockinette, maybe not choosing a stockinette project. And then some people mentioned that this is sort of just goes back to the whole process versus product knitting discussion, which of course it does, and I didn't realize that so much when I was talking about it last week, but I guess I still don't know if I would consider myself a process or product knitter, because while I do enjoy the whole knitting part of knitting, like I enjoy the physical act of knitting, I also enjoy many other parts of it, like buying yarn and stashing yarn. I really enjoy different tools and trying out different methods and techniques in knitting. And I also enjoy and wear many of my finished projects. And I also really enjoy gifting finished projects to other people and seeing them enjoy them. So I definitely knit for the finished object, but I enjoy the process, and I try to use tools and supplies like yarn. It's kind of a tool, more like a material, I guess. I use tools and materials that are particularly interesting to me and that will keep my attention the whole time I'm knitting. So just a little bit of a update, I guess, from last week, and thank you for those of you who shared your thoughts on the topic. Okay, so this week I do have just I have 2 works in progress that I've actively been working on. Some of you have mentioned that there are a couple of works in progress that I haven't been showing lately, and that's just because I haven't worked on them. I have not worked on my strawberry top, which was the pink and light pink and darker pink polka dot. I can show you, it's right here. My beautiful bag from Love Sock Wool, which I think I should just, I'm tempted to take the project out of this bag so that I could use this bag for something else, but then I feel like, where would I put it? And then I'm never going to work on it. I'm not working on it now, so maybe I should just take it out anyway. But here it is. This is the strawberry top. The bottom's curling up, but it's just a garter stitch edge. And I still am where I was last time, and you can see that I took the needles off. And I'm just holding them together precariously with a piece of ribbon. I think that the reason why I'm not enjoying this knit as much as I hoped that I would, or I really do want the finished project for this one. So going back to the whole beginning thing in last week, I do want to wear the top that this will make. I think I'm not enjoying knitting it so much because although I like the yarn, which is the Holst Garn, that Holst Garn Super Soft, which is a 100% not superwash wool, I really do like knitting with that yarn, but I only like knitting with it after it's been washed, and I've talked about this before as well, that sometimes I wash yarn before I knit with it, and I don't know if it was because I was so eager to cast on, or I just sort of forgot or what happened, but for some reason I didn't wash that yarn before I started knitting with it, and that yarn in particular is one that I prefer to knit with washed. So it still has the spinning oil in it, which is just a character of that yarn. They keep the spinning oil in it. Although someone on Ravelry told me and linked to the shop where you could buy that same yarn that's already washed, actually. So that was intriguing. But I bought this one at Makery 14, and I really like to support Stephanie, so whatever. The point is, I didn't wash that yarn before I started knitting with it, and so it has the spinning oil smell, which I don't like, and it has this sort of drag and stickiness of spinning oil. Not sticky really, but sort of grippy. Like, it's not sticky like candy on your hands is sticky, but it has kind of a grippy, to me, unpleasant feeling. So I prefer to wash it before I knit with it. I didn't do that for that project. I haven't worked on it in a while, and perhaps what I should do is just break the yarn, wash the remaining part of the yarn, and I could even wash the project on the needles. I would have to wait for it to dry, of course, but could make it worth it and more enjoyable to knit. So I'll have to think about that, but right now it's just not on the top of my list. There's some other projects I haven't worked on in a while. The Sailor socks, I currently have one of those, and it's totally finished and I love it. I just haven't knit the second one. The blueberry waffle socks that I was knitting, I have not finished the first one. I just have a little bit to go, but I just got interested in other things, so I'm not working on that. I haven't knit on my crocheted blanket in a while, but that's something that I really would like to get back to working on. So those are just a couple of lingering works in progress that I have, but more recent works in progress that I won't show you this week are my Arnie and Carlos socks, the Regia socks in the Fall Night colorway. I haven't worked on those this week because I've been knitting my other socks, which I'll show you. And I also have not worked anymore on the Komodo cardigan, which is in that sort of chartreuse lace weight. Okay, but what I did work on this week are the socks for my new sock pattern, which will be a free pattern on Ravelry. It is called the Arrowhead socks, and there's already a pattern page up on Ravelry, but there's not detailed pictures of the socks yet because I haven't finished knitting them. So I prefer to knit and block my socks before I take pictures of them, and so I will try and do that this week. But just to show you, here is the first sock, and I knit this using some yarn that was donated to me to knit a pattern, to create a pattern, and that came from Mint Rain Yarns, and she has an Etsy shop with lots of different colors, semi-solid, tonals, self-striping, variegated. She has lots of yarn. I really enjoyed knitting with this base. It's nice and squishy, but has a good twist to it. And this is the soft sock base. So here is the pattern. It's a little bit tricky to show here on the camera because it requires a particular light to see it. You can see it pretty well there, but there's sort of like little arrows that run along the sock and then just on the top of the sock. This is the bubblegum colorway, and it's hot pink, and it has been a lot of fun to work with. I actually brought this project down to the water with me yesterday, and after we had dinner, I sat on the blanket and was working on this just a little bit. Not so much, but Thomas had brought his book and was thinking he might read some, so I decided to bring some knitting. And here is the second sock. So I cast this on this week, and just trucking along. So I've finished all the gusset decreases, and I'm on to the foot of the sock now. Like I said, this will be a free pattern up on Ravelry, and I'll just tell you a little bit more about it right now. It does have instructions for the heel turn, heel flap and turn, and for the toe. In my previous free sock pattern, Flying North, which I'm wearing those socks right now, in my previous sock pattern, I just sort of linked and made reference to afterthought heels for the heel, and I linked the Fish Lips Kiss heel pattern as an option. This pattern will have the full instructions written out for the heel and the toe. So this is just a heel flap and turn. I just did a slip stitch heel flap in a different color, obviously. Just a cream yarn. And then for the toe, this is a rounded toe, and it looks kind of pointy right now, but that's partially because I just haven't blocked it, and it will be more rounded and normal shaped. But this is a round toe, so the decreases are worked at 8 points, I think. Well, it depends what size you're knitting, I guess, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So mine has 7, and this is the smallest size, so it will be either 7, 8, or 9 points, I think. But basically, it's going to be hard to see that. It makes a spiral toe. It's not the same pattern as the pattern that might actually be called the spiral toe, which has really distinct lines that go all the way around it. This one just has decreases all at certain points. So, I really could use some sock blockers, but I don't have any, so this is what you get. But yeah, these were a lot of fun to knit, and I am cruising right along on the second one. The pattern is really easy to memorize, and it's really easy to read your knitting to see what row you're on. So I've also got that feedback from one of my test knitters who's working on this now, and I agree with her. She says that, you know, it doesn't matter if you set it down mid-row or whatever, it's really easy to figure out where you are. So excited to have those almost finished. The pattern is all written up, and like I said, it's just being test knit now. I need to finish up the second sock so that I can take some pictures of it for the pattern page, and then that should be released definitely in August sometime. So keep your eye out for that. Again, it's the Arrowhead socks. The other project that I'm working on this week is the second version of my new shawl design, which I showed you last week, and the week before, I think. And I am knitting a smaller version of the shawl so that the shawl will be offered in 2 different sizes. I'll talk about the first one later because it's my finished object, spoiler alert. But for the small one, I am trying to make a version that you could knit out of 1 skein of fingering weight yarn, because I know a lot of people have 1 skein of fingering weight yarn in their stash and perhaps might enjoy knitting this shawl out of that yarn. So I am using this yarn. I'm not going to pronounce it, but there you go. In the basic sock, which is a 75% superwash wool and 25% nylon blend. The colorway is Automation, and this is a 100 gram skein, and it has 460 yards, 420 meters. 460, 220. So yeah, this is the colorway. I showed you this a couple of weeks ago because my friend Carrie, who used to live in Stockholm, sent this to me. and it was a color that she had bought with another color which is up on my shelf, a really bright purple, and she said they weren't really what she expected or her colors, but I really love them. So this is a gray with blues and some almost green in there too, and slightly brown. But it's a really interesting color with a lot of depth, and I think it will look really great with my light gray coat that I have for the winter. So I thought I would give it a shot and try to make a small version of the shawl, which will just take this one skein. And I also want to knit along with my test knitters so that I can try to catch any extra mistakes that I have in there too. So this is what I have so far. Just the first pattern repeat. I don't know if you can see it so well, but there it is. And you can see the colorway. There's some blues in there and some lighter parts. But it is a really nice color, and it's really interesting. I think I mentioned this before, but in natural light it looks much more gray with blue, and then in artificial light it looks more brown and green. So anyway, I am enjoying knitting that. I think this is probably my favorite, definitely my favorite shawl design so far that I have designed. Favorite shawl pattern that I've designed. And I'm excited to knit it again. So, show us the finished one already. Here it is, and let me just say, this yarn, this is the Holst yarn, super soft, and it's in the iced colorway, which is a really nice pale blue. And it is so light and airy and just delightful. It's really different than working with sock yarn, which is what I knit a lot of shawls out of. But this yarn is a 2-ply, and it says that it's a fingering weight yarn, but I think it's more of a light fingering because there are, I think, something like 314 yards for 50 grams, which would be something, 628 yards for 100 grams. And usually a fingering weight yarn is closer to 400 to 500 yards, I think. So it is a pretty light yarn, but that said, it does have it could have a large gauge because the yarn itself is so fluffy, kind of. It definitely has a halo, and it sort of just expands to not expands, but it fills the space that you let it. So you could knit it super tight, or you could knit it nice and loosely. So here's the shawl, and I'm so pleased with how it turned out. It is quite large. It's my full wingspan, and I measured it. I think it's 80 inches wide, which is actually slightly longer than my wingspan. And it's 80 inches wide and I think 36 inches deep. So, quite large. That's it, folded in half. But it's just, I'm just really happy with it. It's really fluffy. And how I wear this is I usually sort of fold down the top part a bit so that I get a nice squishy neck part here. And then I wrap around my left and tuck it under. And then I take this right side And I usually just tuck that under too. And then I sort of fold the top over just a bit. And then I kind of just fold the ends underneath so they're not really showing. Stand up just slightly. See? So it's a little bit showing, but you can just sort of fluff them in there and it's totally fine. So maybe you can get a feeling, it's hard to convey, but just how squishy and airy this shawl is, and I think it's going to be just really nice in the winter. In school, like I mentioned before, sometimes I really like wearing a shawl in class because it's a nice warm accessory that doesn't mess up your writing area. And I can also see myself, I'm looking over at our couch, I can see myself curled up on the couch with this as well, which is mostly what I use my Bridgewater shawl for. I have that one on my lap right now, which I usually do because it's kind of cold in here. And I'm wearing wool socks, so I could wear this for the rest of the time, actually. But yeah, so here it is. And what else do I want to say about this? So it has a, the edging, which last time I only had the body part, but the edging has this pattern here, and it's sort of, it's not feather and fan, but it's similar idea with some slight differences. And then it has a similar lace from the main body motif, slightly different, it's with a little bit more lacy parts, and the picot bind off. And I just love it, and I want to knit another one. I am knitting another one already, but I would really love to knit one in Brooklyn Tweed Loft, and I reorganized my yarn this weekend too. That's something else I did, which was a lot of fun. You can see my box up there. One of them. My other box of yarn is just down to my left here, and that has darker colors in it. And I do have 5 skeins of Loft in the Long Johns colorway, which is a really beautiful, cool red. So I have 5 skeins of this red, which I think is a really beautiful red color because a lot of times when you see red, it's warm red, so it has really warm tones in it, closer, like it's red leaning towards orange and yellow. It has more warm tones in it, even though red itself is sort of a warm color. This one, which is Long Johns, is, because it's a tweed yarn, it has other colors incorporated into it, and I think that it has more of a cool feeling. So it's a red that leans more towards blues and purples, if that makes sense to you. I really love Brooklyn Tweed Loft. I have 5 skeins of this color, and I have these reserved for the Wheaton wrap. I think I can make the wrap size with 5 skeins. It comes in like scarf, wrap, throw, or I can't remember, small wrap, large wrap, throw or something. It's a really pretty pattern with cables and lace. So that's kind of reserved for this. This is kind of reserved for that. And then I also have 2 skeins of the another color that I love, which is the plume color from also Loft from Brooklyn Tweed. And this is a purple that has flecks of blue and red in it as well as other colors, I'm sure. And this was given to me by my mom. She sent this to me after Christmas when I was back in the United States and I had lost my favorite shawl, which was the Rock Island shawl that I knit out of this yarn. And I lost it when we were in San Francisco. And I hardly ever lose things, so it was really upsetting. And she sent me the yarn to make a new one. So this is reserved for that. And that's the 2 colors of Loft that I have. So I'm thinking that I might want to knit my new shawl design in another color of Loft, but I haven't decided yet. And I kind of want to see when I knit the smaller version what size that comes out to, and perhaps I'll decide then how much yarn I need to order or something to make another version in Loft, if I want to do a large one or a small one. The pattern for my new shawl design isn't out yet, but it is being test knit right now, or I sent it to my test knitters. So, and thank you to all of you who offered to test knit. It was quite overwhelming, actually, and I really appreciate your just being so excited and eager to knit my patterns. So, there will be future test knits, and I wish that I could have everyone test knit, but that's kind of what writing the pattern is for, so that everyone can knit it if they want. But I just wanted to show you some small features of this shawl, which were just part of designing it, I guess. So in the main part of the shawl, you can see the eyelet holes are quite large. And that's just these are normal yarn overs, and these are yarn overs that happen on both the right side and the wrong side of the fabric. So they make different types of holes, you can see already. And then when you go down to this section, which is the section I didn't have last week, you might be able to see that the holes are quite a bit smaller than they are here. And that's because it uses this is a different hole technique, or whatever. This is a yarn over, this is a make one in a particular way. It's the make one so that you get a hole. If you do a make one for most things, like when you do make ones for the edge of the shawl and you don't want a hole, then you twist the stitch. But when you do a make one and you don't twist the stitch, you get little holes. And so I think it just gives a nice difference in texture, because the edging then still has eyelets, but it's just different than the rest of the shawl, which kind of makes it more of a solid section, but still with the lightness that eyelets give, or make ones, whatever. So that is it. I think that's all I can say about that shawl. I'm sure that I will have more to tell you about it in the upcoming weeks, and with knitting the second one, definitely, possibly a third. And I will, of course, let you know when that shawl pattern is released. I have given the test knitters about a month to knit it, so depending on their feedback and everything, we will see when that pattern comes out, but it will likely be in September at some point. One more thing about the shawl, this was something else that I did this week, which was quite fun. I draw all my schematics for the patterns by hand. And here is the schematic for the shawl. You can see that that's only half the schematic, but my lovely sister will now take the picture that I sent her and mirror image it and just clean it up, because I don't have a scanner, and she has all sorts of Photoshop stuff that she uses for architecture, so she does that for me, and works out really nicely. But that was a lot of fun, and I was working on that last night with my .005 tip pen. Okay, so enough about the shawl. Technique tip this week. Last week I had mentioned that for my socks, sometimes I like to cast on a larger number and then decrease directly before starting the leg so that I have some more stretch in the cuff. Somebody on the Ravelry group mentioned that they are a new sock knitter and they would love to know more how I do that. So this will be written in the pattern, but it's a free pattern. I'm happy to share it now just so you know. But for this sock, this particular one is 56 stitch leg count. And the pattern has a 56 stitch, 64 stitch, and 72 stitch option for the sizing. And in the beginning, when you cast on for the cuff, you have the option to either start directly how you want. If knitting a 56 stitch leg and cuff works for you, then you can just start with 56 stitches if you want. But if you want to try this out for a really nice and stretchy cuff, if you need a little bit of extra room in your cuff, like if you have a large calf like me, and you need a little bit of stretch up here before it goes into the slimmer leg, if you cast on for one size up, so for the 56 stitch sock, you cast on 64 stitches, and then you decrease, so you do 1 by 1 ribbing in 64 stitches, and then on one row, right before you start the pattern, you decrease 8 stitches in that one row. That was part of the question. Did you do it all at once, or? Yes, I decrease 8 stitches all in that row. So I believe it's like knit 6, knit 2 together all the way around or something like that, but that's in the pattern I have written. And then you just continue on now with your new stitch count of 56 stitches down the leg, and it's really nice. I like it a lot. Rather than changing needle sizes, which sometimes helps, but sometimes just makes it sort of floppy, I think this works really well. So those details are all in the new pattern, which will be coming soon. A couple other questions this week. I had a question from Pink Bee on Ravelry about how I join my yarn. And I don't have a method that I particularly love. When I'm knitting a pattern that requires more than one ball of yarn, oftentimes what I do is just finish one ball with a little bit left over for me to weave in the end, and then I just pick up the next ball of yarn and start knitting the next stitch with that yarn. Sometimes I hold the two doubled for 3 or 5 stitches, but that can result in a slightly thicker line right there, so depending on what type of yarn you're using, you may or may not want that. I also have used the splice method, so for this shawl, which is out of a non-superwash wool. It's a very woolly wool, and it's not super tightly twisted or smooth in texture. I can just pull it apart pretty easily, and or when I get to the end, I guess, mostly. When I get to the end of the ball, to start a new ball, I just put them together and spit on my hand or use some water, whatever, and rub my hands together to create some friction and heat and felt the ends together is what I do. Sometimes I will take the string from one side and the string from the new ball and do like a hook like this with a little tail on each side of maybe like 1 inch or 1.5 inches, and then rub that together. So, but if you felt them really good, it shouldn't come apart, and you're also going to knit that part again, so it's also kind of intertwined just based on the knitting. I've never used the magic join or whatever for like that people use in magic cakes. I've never used that before, but I can definitely see that being a benefit for if you're doing a lot of color work, or not color work so much, maybe, I don't know, maybe color work. Well, if you want to make a magic cake shawl or something. But yeah, I haven't used that. So if you have any good joining techniques, let me know. can post them in this week's discussion thread. That would be great. So another person on Ravelry, Inoka, I think, not sure. She asked about how you know, so part of the discussion last week was about advancing your knitting skills and trying new techniques and really enjoying what you do, which sometimes might mean that you just want to knit a plain sock, which is totally fine. But to just push yourself a little bit to sometimes try new things and advance your techniques and not be afraid of a pattern because it might have new techniques that you don't know how to do, because there's many resources for helping you learn those new techniques. So Inoka on Ravelry asked, how do you know what is an intermediate pattern and what means intermediate? So this is kind of tricky because a pattern sometimes says if it's beginner, intermediate, or advanced. I know that the Knitty patterns have a scale which has more creative names, but like mild, spicy, whatever. You get the point. And like the Brooklyn Tweed patterns have a scale, so they'll tell you, is this a beginner pattern or intermediate or advanced? But part of her question, I think, was, well, is there some sort of guideline for what is an intermediate pattern? Like, is there a certain number of skills or a certain skill set that you should have to be able to accomplish an intermediate pattern? And really, no, because as the designer, you get to decide what to rate your pattern, if you even rate it at all. That's part of an interesting thing, I think, about publishing on Ravelry, is there is quite a range of different quality of pattern, just the way that patterns are written. There's not really a standard way that patterns are formatted, or there's not even a standard way of writing patterns necessarily. As a designer, you get to pick that, and you sort of get to gauge, okay, that's kind of a weird word to use, but you get to judge what your level of difficulty is, if you even want to include that in the pattern. So for the test knit of my new shawl, I mentioned that it was more of an intermediate or advanced pattern because it required you to do something on both sides, the wrong side and the right side of the shawl, in parts of the lace section. So if you've never done that before, like if you've only knit a shawl where you have the lace part that you're doing on the right side and then on the wrong side you're only purling or something like that, it's a little bit different. It's not particularly difficult, but it's not something that I think a beginner knitter might necessarily feel comfortable doing. So that's why I picked to rate mine more intermediate or advanced. That doesn't mean if you're a beginner knitter that you shouldn't knit it, because it's really not that hard, and if you are able to, if you have access to YouTube, which you do if you're watching this, then you can always look up techniques on there and teach yourself how to do things. And if the pattern is well written and well explained, then it should be a really good starting point to help you get to the end project. This sock, on the other hand, is definitely beginner friendly. It has pretty much written out instructions for everything, and it's a really simple pattern to follow. And maybe also because it's not lace, so it's easier to read where you are in your pattern than on the lace part. Even though, okay, I can read where I am on the lace part, but a beginner knitter might not be able to read where they are on a lace part. So it's kind of tricky because there isn't necessarily a standard for anything, just like there's not really standard symbols for charts in knitting. There's not really standard abbreviations that are used. And even though there has been some effort, I think, to standardize chart symbols and knitting terminology, there's still lots of independent designers who, and even in magazines, they all use different symbols. Yeah, they might be really similar symbols, but they could be different. And the abbreviations mean the same thing, or, okay, SSK is pretty much always SSK, but how you write a centered double decrease. Is that a slip one, knit two together, pass the slip stitch over, or is it slip two stitches together, knitwise, knit one, pass the two stitches over? So, yes. It's tricky because, yeah, like I said, there's not really a standard. So you sort of have to be able to judge for yourself, I think, if a pattern is, what level the pattern is at, and perhaps you can read other people's project notes and things like that and see on Ravelry there's a difficulty rating over on the side. So on the side of a pattern page, you can look at the difficulty rating, and anybody who wanted to could rate the difficulty of the pattern. So they could mark it as, I think, piece of cake or something like that, easy as pie or something, and to something really difficult. I don't know what the really difficult one is. But then if you have, hundreds of people who have knit a project, maybe even if the designer hasn't indicated if it's a beginner, intermediate, or advanced pattern, you could figure out from other people's ratings how they thought it was. Again, that's all up to the individual person and how easy it was for them. But maybe you can get a better idea that way. So I think that's it for this week. I'm hoping to spend some time in the upcoming week knitting on the new shawl design in the smaller version, as well as possibly working on some math and just calculating for the sweater that I hope to knit in the Quince & Co. sitting right up there in the egret colorway, which I showed you my swatch for. Has the two big cables, which this sweater will have much more cables, but the swatch had two big cables, if you remember that. So yeah, that's what I'm hoping to do this week, and this is Thomas's last week of work for the summer, and then he'll have 2 weeks of vacation before we both start school again. So we will probably be trying to do some more things next week and the week before, the week after, which should be fun. But yeah, I hope you are having a nice summer or winter, and that you are having lots of time for knitting. See you next week. Bye.